There we go. All right. Hi, YouTube folks. All right. So Dr. Rosenthal is currently a chief resident physician in neurology at NYU Langone here in New York City, and will be starting a fellowship as well in New York this summer, later on at Weill Cornell-New Presbyterian Hospital. Received a Bachelor in Science in Neuroscience and a Doctor of Medicine from NYU, New York University. And his clinical interests are in neurophysiology and epilepsy, as well as some previous traumatic brain injury work, which received the American Academy of Neurology's Young Investigator Award. Pretty cool stuff. He's also a longtime yoga student and instructor, and hosts the Neuroscience and Yoga online conference, which maybe some of y'all spotted recently. It was just a couple of weeks ago. So we're super excited to have you join us, Dr. Rosenthal, and let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I just have to give Chinmay and Cora an amazing shout out for putting together Simply Neuroscience. I think it's one of the greatest things ever created for high school students and college students interested in neuroscience. So huge kudos to you guys.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, where do we start? I mean, maybe we can go back to the super early days. What got you curious about neuroscience to start off with?
You know, I reflect back on this and I don't know the one answer, but when I was 10 or 9, I guess, my grandmother had a stroke and she lost the ability to talk. And that was obviously, you know, pretty devastating for the family, but it really made me wonder, like, how could you have a brain process that takes away someone's ability to talk? And I started really reading about brain stuff, but not in a like, I want to know neuroscience way. It was, I want to understand what's happening to my grandma way. And then years later, when the opportunity arose in, you know, high school to think about summer, summer programs and projects, I was always gravitating towards neuroscience stuff. So the really early days, I remember just like writing, anytime I was asked to write a paper, it was always about neuroscience. And anytime I chose a summer program, I was always doing something related to neuroscience. And yeah, that's kind of how it developed. And then by the time I got to college, I was like, I want to do nothing but neuroscience.
Great, that's fantastic and really inspiring for our younger people joining us today. So moving forward, how did you feel that connection to neuroscience, especially through your personal relations, inspired you to move forward?
This is really interesting. And it's actually, you'll see this everywhere, like who your mentors are and what their interests are influence you consciously and subconsciously. Like you really move in the direction of your mentors. So like obviously choose your mentors carefully too. And the the people who really inspired me early on, when I was in a summer program, I guess it was my junior year of high school, we all went to live at this university in New Jersey, and it was like a summer program for people in New Jersey. And I think there were maybe 80 of us, and we took, you chose what classes and projects you did. And so a very small number of people, like 10 people were in this neuroscience program. And there were 2 or 3 professors who were with us for 3 weeks, pretty much every day. And all of them were amazing, but one of them in particular really got me interested in thinking about the brain as a computer and inputs and outputs and processing and really operationalizing, like, how does a neuron take information, convert it into electrical signals, and then process those electrical signals to then impact behavior and store memories and all of that, and get better at doing it over time. And we built computer models of how neurons do this and all of that. I think that's when things really started getting solidified. So yeah, having a mentor who made it cool and interesting and showed you the new, the new stuff that's exciting, but then also giving you the background you need to understand it. That's what really did it for me.
That's great. Thank you. And then also just a reminder for everybody else, Chinmay put it in the chat as well. Please feel free to hop in at any point to give your questions. So building off of your mentorship path, what would be your advice for anybody interested in neuroscience or anything about the brain moving forward into their career?
Neuroscience is gigantic. Neuroscience is the coolest field of science because it spans every other level of science. So there is molecular neuroscience, there is genetic neuroscience, there is cellular neuroscience, there is network and computational neuroscience, there is behavioral neuroscience and systems neuroscience. And there is social neuroscience, right? So not just in an individual, but how do individuals interact with each other? So every other level of science is touched by neuroscience. And that's obviously because like we are central to the process of science. And so the first thing that I would say if you're interested in neuroscience is like congratulations, like you have an enormous number of opportunities, and like if you can cultivate that interest and keep it going, you're going to find like so many things you can be interested in. Like me personally, like I've ended up in neurology. I mostly do clinical care. I really don't get to do much like molecular neuroscience anymore, or behavioral neuroscience or social neuroscience, but those are all interests of mine, right? So I can like still read about those and hopefully move research projects that I want to do in that direction. And so my other piece of advice would be to, I brought up mentors before, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have multiple mentors and to take the initiative to meet with them regularly. I'm really lucky in that when I was in college, I found a mentor by accident, like wasn't like conscious enough to like be thinking about mentorship. But one of my favorite attendings to this day has been my mentor for 8 or 9 years. We meet every few months. She has dramatically shaped my path. Every time I'm steering off course or like not sure what to do, she's like, no, do this. Like, and she just keeps me on track and really doing what I need to do to advance in medicine. And I think it's really important to have someone like that on your team. The other thing is, it's good to have multiple mentors. Some of them are going to come and go, like people come to your institution, leave your institution, but they will always kind of be people you can reach out to. And, you're going to be mentors to people eventually too. And sometimes your mentors reach out to you for help for things. And it's just like, it's really, really nice to have all these people that make you feel like neuroscience is your second family or something. I hate saying family because I think it sometimes gets abused. But like, there are people who are close to you, who care about you, and you care about them.
That's great. Thank you. And then we have some points in the chat. Also, Sarah raised their hand. Feel free to hop on mic now, Sarah.
Okay, thank you so much for talking here. I really appreciate it. I'm currently representing the Dunbar High School Neuroscience Club today. And I just had a question about mentors. Since some of us are currently high school students, I was just wondering, like, is there some specific ways you recommend of us reaching out to some mentors?
Yeah, it's so usually a mentor relationship is mutually beneficial, meaning like both parties benefit. And so if there is the opportunity for research, then usually that is something that a high school student can participate in. But I bet it's hard because I imagine some mentors are going to be a little resistant to having someone who hasn't had college level classes yet participate in research. I don't know if you guys have had experience with that. I don't know how that has gone. Have you had experience with that?
Well, not really, but I know there's some online college courses. Would you recommend like taking some of them to show the professors that you're ready for like college level work?
Yeah, I think that would really be impressive, as long as it doesn't take away from your like high school experience. And the other thing that you could do is, it doesn't have to be like a professor at a university. Like your first mentor could be someone who you just shadow in your local community, who's either a researcher or a physician or a psychologist or someone who just shows you what it's like. Yeah, so I don't think it necessarily has to be that full research mentorship relationship, especially early on. It could just start as a shadowing relationship. And the other thing is, if your family knows anyone in those professions, like it's always good to have your parents invite that person over and like talk to them.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Of course.
Thank you. And then so we've got some questions in the chat. We'll go from there. Could you provide some more information on your journey with yoga and neuroscience?
Sure. I'm curious what the person wants to hear more about in particular, but I will talk more about my college experience. So I went to NYU for undergrad, highly recommend. It was like amazing time. And the neuroscience department at NYU is kind of like, they're very PhD focused. So my undergrad experience was often like in classes with the graduate students towards the end. And I think what really was amazing during my college experience was neuroscience is a very small community. So I think in my major, there were 30 of us who were graduating from the neuroscience program. So we all knew each other very well. And we were in every single class together. And our whole department had one classroom, and every class took place in that classroom. And this is obviously in like a huge university, right? So the entire graduating class was like 5,000 people, but there were 30 of us. So the first classes that I took in neuroscience were Intro to Neuroscience. It's like, you know, before you can take any other ones, that was a prerequisite. And I was very lucky or unlucky because my professor was not the normal professor. So the normal professor takes a sabbatical, which is where a professor like takes a year off every 7 years. And so the chair of the department, this very intense researcher named Tony Mavshun, was the professor. And I don't know if anyone has heard of Tony Mavshun or knows him, but he's like very famous neuroscientist, like very big deal. And he was extremely intense with us. He treated us like we were way above the level we were. And it was a shell-shocking but really eye-opening experience, because we would just go from 0 to 100. And I think in that class, I learned more than I had ever learned in any other class. We covered all of neuroscience in 3 to 4 months. And our tests were crazy. There were 14 essays, and you would pick like 5 or 7, I forget how many, but you would pick whichever questions you wanted to answer, and then you would write it out. And each answer would be like 10 pages. And it would be like, you know, describe the process of vision perception from the light ray to the second layer of the visual cortex. And you just had to name every single step that's happening in that pathway. And I really, like, it sounds crazy, but I loved it. I thought it was so cool how much we knew about that. And I'll just tell you like one of the really cool things. So do you guys know how neurons construct the visual world? Like, think about everything you're seeing. Like, how does a neuron represent that? Have you guys encountered this at all? It's utterly crazy. So like, I'm just gonna draw a little bit, if that's okay. So the retina has ganglion cells that are kind of at the top of the retina, and they're receiving information from the photoreceptors, so the actual receptors that receive light. I'm not going to draw the photoreceptors, but just imagine that like this retinal ganglion cell is representing this space, this one, this space, this one, this space, this one, this space. And so if we have a line and these are measuring how much light is in each of these positions, then this one's going to fire if there's a lot of light here. okay? But the other thing that they do is it will fire more if there's not a lot of light here, right? So it becomes sensitive to contrast. Like if it's light here, dark here, this one will fire a lot more. If it's light in both of these will fire a little bit. Okay, so now you have this ability to detect contrast. And then these retinal ganglion cells, I'm skipping some steps, but they're going to pass information on to the next layer. And there are going to be neurons like this. And as they're getting information, it's kind of crossed. So each retinal ganglion cell is passing information to all of these. And so now, if the light is like this, you're going to perceive this as a line. And then this one is going to receive information from these three and be like, oh, that's a line. But another neuron is going to receive information from the ganglion cells that would be arranged this way in space and be able to tell, oh no, the line's actually going up and down rather than side to side. And so you have these neurons that are sensitive. You start by saying, where is the light? Then you say, where is the light stop? And then you say, what's the angle of the light? You know, what's the orientation? And now you have this representation of lines in the world, and you can see how you can start adding to that. What's the color? What's the shape that we're making? All of that. What is the, whose face is that? So it's really, really cool. And once I learned this, I was like, oh my God, this was the right choice. And there's other really crazy ones like sound localization. So like, I'm sure you've noticed this, but like, even when you're not looking at something, you know where in space a sound is coming from because your brain calculates the time difference between the ears. So like if sound hits the left ear first, it came from the left, right? And not only can you just tell like, oh, it came from the left, how long the difference takes tells you the angle. So you know like exactly what angle in space from the left it came from. So I normally, like if we were in person, I would just snap my finger in front of you and have you like, you'd all close your eyes, I'd snap my finger and you'd be able to point exactly to my finger. And even though everyone's in a different seat, you would all point exactly to the right place. It's like insane. So all of these little things about neuroscience were like what really intrigued me in Intro to Neuroscience. And then we did a cellular and molecular course where we did a lot of neurotransmitter basic science stuff, gene expression in neurons, and membranes and receptors. And then there was a behavioral and integrative neuroscience class. That one was a lot of like fMRI, EEG, stuff like that. And then you could choose whatever classes you wanted to take. So I took an entire class about the auditory system. I took an entire class about the visual system. We took classes about like neurodevelopment. I audited a theoretical neuroscience class. I can't even remember all the classes I took, but it was just so many amazing, cool things. And it's really interesting. Like you would think that modern neurology is very in tune with modern neuroscience, but that's not the case. So modern neurology, which is the treatment of neurologic diseases in patients, is really based in internal medicine. Like it's, there is a clot, treat the clot. But the neuroscience of it really comes into play in specific areas of neurology, yeah, like epilepsy. The reason I'm so interested in epilepsy is because it is about networks. It is about how neurons connect with each other and how sometimes those connections result in hypersynchronous abnormal electrical activity, otherwise known as seizures. So yeah, that's kind of more about my path. I hope I answered that person's question, but if they have follow-up questions, I'd love to answer them.
Great, that was really fascinating, honestly. Sarah, you have your hand raised.
Oh, it's me again. I was wondering, so I was researching into like your involvement in yoga and neuroscience, and since yoga is like a form of art, I'm also currently leading a art therapy program at a local hospital, and I was just wondering if you have any like thoughts or like feedback on like anything related to like the overlap in like art and neuroscience and how we can use art to help patients with neurological diseases recover?
Yeah, there's a lot on this, particularly with regards to music. And also neuroaesthetics is a whole field. So like, how and why do we perceive things as beautiful? And what effects do beautiful things have on us? And I think we all know from like internal personal experience that there's a lot. And so there's fields of therapy like music therapy, art therapy that try to use these beautiful things to help with recovery from diseases. And I don't know if we know the exact mechanisms. I'm definitely not an expert on this though. But Sarah, if you have the skill set to find papers, I think the terms to search are music therapy, art therapy, and neuroscience. Those are going to be some of the main things. And then some of the researchers that come to my mind, she wasn't a neuroscientist, but she collaborated with a lot of neuroscientists, and she was really interested in neuroaesthetics. Her name is Gabrielle Starr, S-T-A-R-R. I think she was an English teacher, but she just got really interested in neuroaesthetics. And then if you're not familiar with finding and reading scientific papers, I do have a video going over how to do that I think is really, really important, and one of the like, main passion projects I have, which is making sure everyone knows how to go to the science.
Oh, that's amazing. Where can I find the video?
So you can find the Neuroscience and Yoga Online Conference YouTube channel, and it's on there.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll definitely look into the music and art therapy. And I have a question about Gabrielle Starr. So did you say she was an English professor or an English teacher?
I think so. Yeah, I think she's an English professor. And then she was really interested in aesthetics and started like collaborating with other people.
Oh, that sounds very cool. Okay, thank you so much. I'll definitely look into all of those.
Yeah.
Great. So I'll take another question from chat. What would be your advice when choosing a specific area of neuroscience you would like to go into?
So for me, one of the main branch points was, do I want to do experiments on animals or not? Like when I was an undergrad. And I personally have very strong feelings about the ethics of animal research. And I'm not like, I don't throw red paint on anyone, but I don't feel comfortable like hurting a mouse. So I actually was going to work in this big famous lab when I was an undergrad. I think it was my freshman year. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I can't believe I have this opportunity. And I got there and there were just walls of mice with electrodes coming out of their heads. And they were like, yep, you're going to be the one who like cuts their heads open and like, whatever. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that. And then they were like, okay, well then you'll be like, we'll put you on the computer side of it and you can like measure all the, like once the recordings come out, you can do some of the analysis. And I was like, oh, I need to go home and think about this. And ultimately what I decided was I actually don't want to participate in like mouse research. I don't want to like be in a lab that does mouse research. So that was a major branch point for me. And I think that for a lot of people, that's probably a branch point. And then I decided I wanted to work on humans. So that kind of limits the experimental techniques I can do. It's much harder to do molecular and genetic things in humans, obviously, because like, it's unethical to just do that to a human, what we accept doing to mice. And so I decided to focus more on like fMRI and EEG and behavioral stuff. And yeah, that's how I made the decision. And other things that really matter are if you are passionate about a project, like you can study it at every level. So like, don't think that if you're interested in like, for example, if someone's interested in neuroscience and yoga, like yoga is pretty much only practiced by humans, right? So you'd be like, oh, well, like that's all we can do. But one of the main mechanisms by which yoga works is by affecting the stress response. And every organism has a stress response. So you can really study the stress response anywhere and maybe learn some insights. So Another thing I want to say about it is that you can switch, like you can do all levels of neuroscience. And like, if you're not as comfortable with the techniques of one, you get a collaborator. Like that's really the beauty of it. So just let what interests you guide you, and what techniques you like definitely don't want to do, just don't do those. And then you'll fall into the right things.
Great. I think that's valuable input for anybody. And so you spoke earlier about your research into strokes and epilepsy. Could you explain more about your path in neurodegenerative diseases and all of your interest in that?
I actually don't do any research in neurodegeneration. I did a few neuroimaging projects when I was in college on TBI, which was a magnetic resonance spectroscopy work. So I think we're all familiar with like an MRI machine, which brilliant little invention. So MRI machines they basically set up a really strong magnetic field. So every atom aligns to that magnetic field. And then when you give it a pulse, you disturb their orientation. So everything was aligned like this, but then it starts spinning all over the place, and it's trying to get back to that normal, the alignment that's set by the big magnet. And so you pulse it and measure it going back, and how it goes back is different based on what material it is. So we're all used to MRI images for anatomical stuff, right? And that's just differentiating how much water there is. So things that are more water are going to go back slower, and things that are less water are going to go back faster, or something like that. That actually might be wrong. I forget. So don't quote me on that. But once you get those different signals from different locations, you can construct an image of like, this has more water, this has less water. And that's the beautiful images of the brain that we're all used to from MRI machines. You can modify the MRI technique. So now it's more responding to oxygen. And oxygen has different magnetic properties based on, I'm sorry, I should have said iron. The different magnetic properties of iron. And iron is going to have different magnetic properties based on whether it's bound to oxygen. And that allows us to do functional imaging, like where is blood flow going in the brain. And then spectroscopy is even a step beyond that. So spectroscopy is measuring, I don't know if anyone's familiar with nuclear magnetic resonance and organic chemistry, but because every element has different magnetic properties, you can measure these peaks of concentrations of compounds. And it really depends on what the material is made of. In the brain, there's only really 4 main metabolites that emerge as reliable signals. But that's 4 metabolites that you can measure using spectroscopy. And so magnetic resonance spectroscopy is measuring the concentration of things that have to do with injury. So like how much cell turnover there is. And then also neuronal integrity, like how structurally and metabolically healthy are the neurons. And putting that together, you can really differentiate people who are not doing well with traumatic brain injury and people who probably will do well. Anatomical scans don't tell you. Like if you do an anatomical scan in someone with a concussion, like you're like, oh, they look fine. But a lot of people have persistent symptoms, and spectroscopy kind of helps distinguish those groups of people because they have more metabolic changes in the brain. So that's spectroscopy. And that was more of what I did in undergrad and early in med school. And yeah, in residency, it's really hard to do research. You don't have a lot of time. So I've really like scaled back, but I'm hoping to get more into some epilepsy research.
Great. You kind of made a perfect segue into our next question.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So can you tell us like a typical day in your life? I know there's a lot going on and you have big plans, but what would you find maybe as soon as you wake up? What are your plans for the day?
Yeah, so there's no typical day in residency. Like every day is different. You're on a different service. Your life is totally different. I'll tell you about like one of our big rotations as like last year residents, it's called Bellevue Consult Senior. So Bellevue Hospital is New York City's oldest public hospital. It's actually the oldest public hospital in the United States of America. It was founded in the 1600s, I forget what year. And it's a very, it's one of the coolest places in the world to train because it's very under-resourced, meaning that, you don't have like a ton of support and other staff to help and medical resources, but you have really sick patients from all over the world. So it's like extremely challenging to figure out like, how am I going to help someone with the limited resources that we have? And so Bellevue Consult Senior is where you're the neurologist who tries to like, supervise the neurology consult service throughout Bellevue Hospital. And so a typical day, so like it's a 24/7 rotation, meaning like you round during the day, you're there during the day, and then you take call at night. So like at night you're home, and if there's a new consult, the person who's in-house will call you and tell you about the consult. And so you get in around 7 o'clock. I usually go to our little Nespresso machine and I make a little coffee and then I sit down and chart review, which means like going through the chart and seeing who's on the list and getting a sense of, what they came in for, what tests have been done so far, and what we think the, diagnosis is, or what are the possible diagnoses. And spend about an hour or so chart reviewing everyone. And then at 8 o'clock, we have lecture. So depending on how busy it is, we'll attend lecture. Our lectures are all virtual, so we just put it on a screen. And then at 9, we start rounding. So an attending will come and we all present cases to the attending and talk about them. And it's really like meant to be a teaching experience. So the attending is supposed to be giving feedback and like really pushing people to think about the cases deeper. And then once we finish table rounding, meaning like sitting and talking about it, then we go and see the patients together. I always try to finish rounds by 11 or 11:30. Sometimes they run really late, like 2 p.m. and I really don't like that. I'm like very strict. So I like to stay on time. And then we come back, we kind of like run the list and talk about everyone's plan. And then the other people on the team will get to work like writing notes and informing primary teams of what we think the plan is. And then at 12, we have lunch and another lecture. And then at 1 or 1:30, I also round on a separate service. So the Bellevue Consult Senior is also in charge of the neuro ICU consult service. So then I'll round with the neuro ICU attending, usually by myself, but sometimes if the list is really big, someone will be with me too. And same process, we talk about them, go see the patients, and then update everyone. And then all throughout the day, we're getting new consults. So I'll get calls about, new things going on. If it's an emergency, we just drop what we're doing and run there. And then if it's not, then we'll see them later in the day. And we split up like who's doing what, and then people, whoever saw them comes back and we talk about it. Our team consists of the attending, the Bellevue Consult Senior, there's a neurology resident who's the Bellevue Consult Junior, there's a psychiatry intern who rotates with us, and we usually have a few medical students as well. And that's our team. We have had a high school student once when I was on, and I don't know how that worked, but I think that they had reached out to the volunteer department and had to go through a process of being approved. So you have to kind of do trainings on protected health information and privacy and all of those things. And then once you've been approved for all that, they give you an ID and you're able to like come in. So yeah, that's a typical day on that service. Oh, and then at 6 p.m. is when things like kind of wrap up. So sign out happens at 6 p.m. That's where you tell the night person about like, hey, these are the patients. This was the plan for them. What I need you to do tonight for this patient is XYZ. Maybe it's like titrate these drips, follow up their EEG, or like, check on their exam, make sure it's the same and not worse. And then the night person will also be getting new consults. And if they get a new consult, they'll see them, get an exam, get a story, and then call the Bellevue consult senior and say like, hey, like this was what I found. And then you talk about a plan together. So that's my favorite rotation in the whole world. It's very busy at times. On the weekend, in addition to covering the Bellevue general consult service and the ICU consult service, we also cover the Bellevue stroke consult service and the VA entire hospital, the Veterans Hospital. And it can get really, really busy, but it's really fun. There's so much going on. The patients really benefit from our help, which is like the whole point, right? It makes it really fulfilling. And I love my colleagues at Bellevue. I feel like I really get along with everyone there. So it's nice.
That's great. Thank you. You've obviously got a very busy day. Sarah, you have your hand raised again.
Hello again. I have a question about science, like the lifestyle balance that you mentioned, because I was talking to someone from USC a little earlier, and they actually told me to not go into like the medical neuroscience field if I want a family at all in the future. And I was wondering like your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I think it's really anything in medicine can be really challenging, some more than others. I think neurosurgery is very, very, very hard. And neurology is not as hard as neurosurgery in terms of lifestyle, just like being blunt about it. And what's hard about the lifestyle is like, yeah, the hours are long, but also it's like demanding outside of work too. Like you don't just like come home and it's like, okay, that's over, next thing. Like you're pretty drained, and you need to like recuperate too. I will say many of my co-residents have families. So I can't think of the exact number, but like at least 3 to 4 people have had children this year in my residency program. And I personally feel like I work really, really hard to try to set some boundaries and have balance. I go to yoga every Saturday, unless I'm on call. And I, see my parents every Saturday. I go out pretty much most nights, actually. Like I'm always going for walks. I'm always going to concerts. So yeah, it's definitely possible. You just have to put your foot down and have boundaries a bit. And there's this thing in medicine where it like finds a way to like take all your time. And if you let it, like it will. So you do kind of have to know what's important and what's like just medicine kind of encroaching on your life a little bit. I'm so sorry if I sound jaded. I'm really trying not to. And the other thing is, I don't know, sometimes people talk about like work-life integration, like you just like make them part of each other. I'm not a huge fan of that because it's really hard to like go to dinner and like talk about normal things with people if you can't stop thinking about like, did I mess that up? Like what's happening with that patient? Let me chart check them. Like you really do leave sometimes and you're like always thinking like, did I mess that up? Like what else could I have done? Like it really is more than just the actual work itself.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, what else do you have in mind? Like what other specific commentary on work-life balance in medicine are you thinking about?
I'm just wondering, like, would you say it's like challenging for most people to like be able to establish that boundary?
Yeah, I mean, so look, there are studies on residents that they age 6 times faster than the average person. So they basically did, I think it's the intern health study, and they measured their telomeres over time and compared it to a control group of the average population. And what they found is residents' telomeres shortened 6 times faster. So like it takes a toll on everyone on average. Some people do better than others. And it's really important to have those coping mechanisms and things outside that are your anchors. But it's definitely not easy. Like, I don't want anyone to think, like, I don't know, when I went into it, I was like kind of naive. I was like, whatever, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of people have done it before me, like I'll be fine. And, you know, maybe that kind of ignorance is helpful. It's like bliss, right? But it is good to be informed and like know what you're signing up for.
Yeah, definitely. And I was also wondering, since it's like going to medicine and neuroscience is such like a longer educational path to take, do you have any advice for how I could like increase my chances into getting to maybe undergrad or like some medical school neuroscience programs in the future, since it's already so competitive now?
Yeah. So things get more and more competitive, and it's kind of a random game now. Like it's not like you should never ever take rejection as a problem with you. It's always just that there are way more candidates, like way more applicants than there are spots. And your thing that you have control over is first and foremost being motivated and passionate and knowing that what you're learning and what you're doing is going to help people. As long as you focus on that, I think that your path will be like enjoyable and successful. So like if you get caught up in like, I have to do this shadowing experience in order to get into this school, like you're really kind of tricking yourself, and nothing that you do is a surefire way to get into a school. So you need to just do the things that are interesting to you and that make you feel motivated and cultivate your passion. And then from there, it's going to be easy to talk about that stuff, right? So once your resume, you know, has stuff on it that you've done that you're passionate about, when you write the summaries in your resume, it's going to come across that you're passionate about it versus like, I just did this as a hoop. And then when you're talking about it in an interview is really when it comes out. So if someone asks you, you know, what was the point of your research project? And you talk about it in this like very bland way, then it comes across like, yeah, that wasn't a real genuine experience. So you're always like, my advice is always be passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah, because right now I feel like just like building your resume and doing all this without passion is like a rabbit hole a lot of people are like falling into, and it's like kind of difficult to not get pulled into that sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it also applies to what you're learning in school, right? You're like, I have to get this grade, like I have to get an A+ and everything. And like obviously, yeah, like it's helpful to get good grades. But if you're passionate about it, the grades will follow, your experience will be better, and you'll actually get the things that you're supposed to get out of it rather than just the grade.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much.
And there are like, you know, it's easy to lose passion. So like there are so many exercises and meditations that can really help kind of keep you firmly rooted in what has meaning to you, what is valuable to you.
Yeah, I think I definitely like I'll need to do like some more yoga as I like continue getting more stressed because it's already kind of building up.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. Speaking more on the application and interviewing side of things, if you were to give any advice to people who are just starting out, maybe they're in undergrad and they're trying to get more into research, or maybe they're in high school and they want to apply to medical-based programs, what advice would you give them?
So I saw that Simply Neuroscience has this incredible spreadsheet of opportunities. I think that is unbelievable. I'm sure all of those programs are now overwhelmed by the number of candidates, right? Which is the problem everywhere. But I think like, you know, you need to start. And there's way more opportunities than we realize. So even if it's not on the list, like there are opportunities not on the list. And if you live near anything that has to do with neuroscience, a clinic, a university, I don't know what else, but anything, then those are places to start. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you. And then, so once you have applied, what would be your ideal interviewing section? What advice would you give somebody that maybe wants to make a good statement about themselves? Obviously, passion is a big role in it, but
Yeah. So you have to practice interviewing. I imagine that the times that you really start interviewing, you're going to be at the university level. And every university has a career development office and a pre-health office and all of that. So you interview with them, you practice interview with them. There are tons of sample questions online. You don't like write it out and memorize it, but have like, what are your key talking points? And since you guys are so early in the process, I think most of you are high schoolers. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but the best thing to do now is start writing down what were the meaningful experiences in my life that made me feel convinced that I want to do this. And if you're convinced, it's going to come across, right? And those stories are going to be your main talking points. So I have certain stories about how I developed as a person that, when I have to do an interview, it's been a while since I've had to do an interview, but like when I have to do an interview, I immediately think of those stories because it's like, yeah, these are the things that shaped me. And it's very relatable. Like if you're just like, I have Excel skills, I have PowerPoint skills, like people are like, okay, get in line. But if you're telling a story about like, one of the stories that I tell is about how I just, I had this situation where I like really wanted a certain position and I was like super focused on it. And I like did not get it at all. And actually like one of my closest friends got it. And what, obviously you feel like totally ego hurt by that, right? Like you're just like devastated. And it jeopardizes your friendship with someone, which is also not great. And so I had to do like a lot of reflection, but what I ultimately decided to do to like handle that situation was to become that person's assistant, my good friend's assistant. And I realized that the title isn't what matters, it's the work. And that was like one of the major lessons in my life as I was growing up. It's the work, not the title. And I think that when I share that, it becomes like, people start to understand me as a person during the interview. And so as you're going through your experiences, write down the stories of the things that really affected you, because then when you're preparing for interviews, you can look back at that and know, like, these are the things that define me as a person. The other thing I'll say about interviews, and I always say this whenever anyone asks me about interviews, because it's crazy. Like someone said this to me when I was preparing for interviews and I was like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not going to happen to me. So, they kind of gave me this advice, like what to do if you get emotional during an interview. I was like, why did I ever get emotional during an interview? Like, what? And their advice was like, it's okay to just be like, hey, I need like a minute to compose myself. Like, that's like actually normal. And I ended up having to do an interview for medical school. So like you schedule all your interviews like months in advance, right? So like my calendar had like interviews randomly, like this week, that week, you never knew like when it was going to happen. And I had an interview like less than a week after my uncle suddenly passed away. And he passed away like on Christmas Day. And they asked me, how was your Christmas? And I was like in tears. And I was like, oh my God, this is happening to me. The thing that I was like, that won't ever happen to me. So it's like always okay to be like, I need a minute to compose myself. And that's all I said. And it was so crazy. This was the only interview I had where I went home afterwards and got an email, here's your acceptance. I thought it was the worst interview I did. And it was the only one where they like immediately came to me. So like, never think that because you got emotional or because you like showed vulnerability or something, like that's it, like you're not getting that interview. Like just, yeah, treat your body and mind like employees and be good to them. And like, if they need a minute, just be like, hey, I'm going to give them a minute.
That's great. I think that value on authenticity is great. And so just moving forward onto, because I know we only have a little bit of time left, is there any like information that you would have told yourself in any step of your neuroscience-based career that you really found valuable, like other than what you've already shared with us?
let's see. I think a big one that I'm really realizing recently, and this might be like, I don't know, it might be a little early for you guys to like realize this, but like people, no one like looks out for you. Like I guess like some people really have, like certain mentors have really, really looked out for me, and I'm very lucky for that. But at a certain point, like especially during residency, if you guys choose to do a residency, you realize that like I said before, like if you offer your time, they will take it, and you'll not get anything in return for that. Like no one is keeping track and being like, yeah, like, you know, we'll take care of you more for this. Like, yeah, you're sacrificing, like, let's help you sacrifice. Like it's, if you sacrifice, then good, we'll take it. And so I think in the last 2 to 3 years, what I've really, really worked on also is kind of just having like my own thing, like where I have, you know, leverage where I, like, if someone's like, we want you to do this thing, I can be like, no, because worst case scenario, I don't do it and you're not happy with me and I have other things and I can always just do those. So kind of just having like, just being like really setting up your life in a way where no one has power over you is kind of what I'm saying. And I know that that's really, I'm sorry, I'm getting really into the development, but I guess this is the stage where I'm at right now, where, you know, you're in your late 20s and you've been working for a while and you start to understand that like organizations just want to extract labor from you. That is what they do. That's their purpose. And it's your job to figure out your value and advocate for your value. And yeah.
Great. Obviously, that's an interesting note. And then also, please feel free, if we haven't answered your questions yet, raise your hand to get on mic or put them in chat also. And then, so we just, as we're rounding off, any thoughts on connecting other interests that may not directly relate to neuroscience into your career, maybe your research or study paths?
Yeah, so like I started practicing yoga when I was really young. I don't know what drew me to yoga, totally separate topic, but I actually felt like a pariah. Like, you know, yoga is very esoteric. It's a very sometimes woo-woo like thing, right? And I was part of a woo-woo like school, like, you know, like I went to a real yoga school, and I always felt like, man, this is so contradictory and so in conflict with science. And it took me a long time to like actually realize like, no, there are 1,500 randomized controlled trials published on yoga. Like there is a science about yoga too. And so I really think that any interest that you have is always going to be connected to neuroscience in some way. Yoga and skateboarding, or sorry, neuroscience and skateboarding, neuroscience and, you know, I don't know, anything you can think of. So there is no limit to what you can connect in terms of your interests. And that's really where things get super cool, is where you have very niche interests. So I encourage that. I think it's like great. In my experience, it's been great.
Great. And I think we'll take from Glory, who has their hand raised.
Sorry, I put my question in the chat, but
Gloria, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that?
I said I already put my question in the chat box.
Oh, your question's in the chat. Okay, let me see if I can find it.
I think it was private message to me. So please, what advice can you give to international medical graduates that want to get a spot in neurology residence?
I think neurology is probably the best one to choose. So for every spot in neurology residency, there are only 0.6 applicants, I think. So they're looking for more people to apply neurology. I do think that, unfortunately, like the options will be more limited. I think that they, you know, there's unfortunately like a bias against international medical graduates. And so certain programs are going to be more accepting than others. Sorry, I'm just like saying the reality of it. And if you build relationships early with programs that maybe are less accepting of it, I bet that improves your chances. And so it's the best choice. I think, if you tried to do a field like plastic surgery or dermatology, I think the chances would be really slim, but neurology, I think your chances would be high for matching.
Great, that's a very valuable information for our international applicants, especially. Yeah, so I know I've asked this before, but any more concluding statements as we round off?
I'm happy to, take questions. If anyone needs to reach out to me, feel free. I'm pretty searchable. Like I have LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm always happy to partner with people if anyone is interested in neuroscience and yoga. And thank you for the great questions. And thank you, Chinmay and Cora, for organizing this platform. And I think those are my concluding statements.
Great. Chinmay, do you want to hop on for a little bit?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rosenthal. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for all these really awesome questions. Really appreciate you all making it out on a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Like mentioned in the chat a couple times earlier, recording, hopefully we'll have that up on YouTube by the end of the day. The Wi-Fi is being very slow, so I don't want to make any promises, but it should be up very soon. And